Welcome to GLCast, the official podcast of GLProUK. GLProUK is a London-based creative studio working with a diverse range of companies, individuals and brands across multiple platforms to provide a wraparound service for your digital content creation requirements. My name is Greg Armstrong. I'm Head of Digital Marketing here at GLProUK and I'm joined by our Managing Director, Jay Ludgrove. This episode, we continue with our How to Start a Podcast series, discussing Rss Feed, hosting site and social media. You have your idea for a podcast. You have your show structure, you've got your brand, you've got your imagery, you've got your music, and you're eager to start.
Damn right.
But there's a few more things to do before we go dashing ahead.
Oh.
Important one to start with is, how are you hosting your podcast? Now, this is the big one that when people start a podcast and go ahead and start doing it, eventually I get the message, Greg, what's an RSS feed? Before we even get to that, it starts at where you're hosting. This is basically your podcast's home. This is where your podcast lives and where it filters out to all the other podcast platforms.
So let's explain that a little bit more. So people assume that your podcast lives in iTunes.
Yes.
It does not.
Does not live in iTunes.
So places like iTunes, Acast, Stitcher, all those places where you can actually listen to a podcast, you know, for the podcast app on your iPhone.
Yes.
It doesn't live in those places.
No.
Okay?
Does not.
Where your podcast actually lives is a hosting site. So a hosting site is just like any kind of hosting site, the same thing as, say, YouTube, right? So YouTube is where you host your video.
Yes.
Vimeo is where you host your video, okay? So you need a hosting site for your podcast, and essentially what that'll do is that's where you upload your audio to, or your finished show.
Yes.
That's where it's uploaded to. That hosting site then sends, and we're going to get into this in a second, but then sends a message. So all of those places we just mentioned, iTunes, Acast, Stitcher, all the other places I can't think of right now.
There's loads now. There's a lot more out there now.
So many places. Any possible place. You know, YouTube is one of those places, right?
Yeah.
So your hosting site sends a message, in the vaguest term possible.
Yeah.
We'll get into it in a second. To those platforms to say, look, there's new audio here. There's a new show, and that's how it populates onto each of those those platforms.
Yeah, it's essentially the tree trunk that branches all your podcasts to the other platforms.
Exactly.
It's a service that provides an RSS feed, which is file hosting essentially, file hosting, where you can easily upload your episode as an MP3 file. And then it takes all the information about the episode and all the artwork to go with it. And then it generates an RSS feed for you. And the RSS feed is a file server on the internet that lets people subscribe to your show.
So RSS feeds have been around for an awful long time.
It has been around for a long time.
Awful long time. What they used to be used for was essentially a way of keeping up to date with information.
Yes.
So if you subscribe to an RSS feed, it would mean that any time there is a change or an addition to that RSS feed, I would be notified if I'm subscribed to that. So it was great for file sharing. It was great for keeping up to date with things. Things like teletext, I believe, were I know deep cuts now, but they were run off things like RSS feeds.
The original internet, yes.
Absolutely. So what podcasting have done, or what podcasting hosting sites have done, is use an RSS feed to essentially make podcasting easy.
Yeah.
Right. Without an RSS feed, it would involve you having to go, and this isn't possible, but you know, without the concept of an RSS feed, and don't worry, we're going to get past this and not be too technical too long in a moment. But without it, you'd have to go to every single place that people listen to a podcast and manually upload a podcast every single time you release an episode. Indeedy. So what's great about an RSS feed is you don't have to do it every week. No. Right, you do it once, you subscribe, and it's done.
Yeah.
What you do have to do is go around to all of those different platforms, such as iTunes, YouTube, Acast, Stitcher, etc., Spotify.
Yeah, tune in.
Tune in, exactly. Google Play.
Yeah.
And you have to submit to each one of those, right? So you have to essentially have an account and set up, just as obviously you would.
Yeah.
Once you've done that, all that's going to ask for is, you know, you're going to set up a profile, etc., and it's going to ask for your RSS feed. by doing that, you're only going to one place to update your podcast, and then it's going to filter down to all of those platforms immediately.
And it's a great feeling when you put your episode out and you see it appear in all these places. It really is. Now, you might be like, but why are you talking about uploading an episode when so far we've only covered the show structure and your artwork, etc.? The reason we're bringing up this now, before you've even recorded an episode, is because you need to know where your podcast is going to be hosted beforehand and how much it's going to cost you and how much storage you're going to have, bandwidth they call it, but effectively your bandwidth is your storage data, your allowance.
As Greg's saying, sorry that we're not getting to the fun bit, the recording bit, but guess what? If you just record something, it isn't a podcast.
Yeah.
Right? A podcast, and there's a lot of debate about this, but you could go onto the podcast forums, ask different people. The general consensus is a podcast is an audio file that has an RSS feed, right? Something which specifically has an RSS feed because it's updated.
That's what you will be asked for when someone asks about the podcast.
Yeah.
What's your RSS feed? Send me a link. Well, that's my RSS feed. Subscribe to that. Now, there are some free hosting sites that have limited bandwidth where you can upload your episodes. And when I first started, I used a few of the free ones to see what it's like, and you don't get much space. Sometimes one episode, and then that's it. You've used up your free space.
So let's explain what we mean by space.
So space is like, for example, like a memory stick. If you put lots of stuff on a memory stick and you start putting films on there, you're going to use up the memory very quickly.
Real quick.
But if you're putting on photos, you'll have more space. Effectively, that is what your bandwidth is. It's space to put your audio files on the internet to become your RSS feed. Now, if you're not paying for the big enough space, over time you will use it up. And you don't want to get into a situation where you have to delete old episodes to put new episodes on.
No.
Because guess what? When you do that, your old episodes will stay on those sites, but they won't work when people click on them.
Oh, really?
So it would just be a dead file. Click, can't play, can't play, can't play. And people are just going to be like, oh, this podcast doesn't even have episodes anymore.
And also, more or less every podcast I've ever found, I've gone back to the beginning and listened to everything.
Yeah.
Like everything.
When you find a podcast that has that effect on you, and you might not start with the first episode,
no,
but if you like the ones you hear, you will go back and listen.
Yeah, I mean, I end up starting loads of podcasts at episode 100 or, episode whatever, 156.
Yeah.
And then I listen to 10 episodes and I'm like, I love this. And then I go back and I listen to all of them. And then then I'm subscribed and then I listen to it each and every week.
And I can tell you from clients we have or our own podcasts, when you look at stats, you are surprised at how often the first few episodes get downloaded a month. It's not like, oh, we're on episode 110, so no one cares about episode 1 through and 5. You go back, you check the stats, they are still getting downloaded regularly. Yeah. People do that. So
weekly. Literally,
weekly.
Almost daily at some point.
So you need to be sure, you need to have the right bandwidth for your podcast, depending on how often you listen. Now, you can start paying a hosting site and your bandwidth for as little as $5 a month, which is around £3 to £4, $3.75,
depending on the exchange rate. Sure.
Let's not debate the exchange rate.
Let's say $5.
But for price packages, they can start around $5.
Okay.
Now, that would be a very basic package. You can then go bigger and end up with loads more additions to it, such as social media posts, schedule times across multiple platforms. There's so much more you can do, but start small. I always start small just to get all you want to do is get your podcast out there, see how it goes. Then you can work your way up the different price plans. You might not want to spend that much money because you might be just a hobbyist. I know people that started podcasts recently, and again, they've come to me afterwards being like, oh my God, I didn't know you had to pay to do a podcast. Like, oh, we've just put it on YouTube. And I'm like, cool, okay, well, you're missing out.
Because it's not a podcast.
It's not a podcast, yeah. So you need to get to that point eventually. And yes, it can, some places cost more than others. Some aren't as good as others. I can't remember the name of it, but I used the platform first of all, which I was like, this is really hard work. And and again, you don't want this to happen. I then had to move my podcast from one hosting site to another.
Now, if I remember correctly, when you originally were on the old hosting site, it used to take you an hour,
God,
maybe longer to actually publish an episode.
You couldn't schedule, so I'd have to get up in the morning. And there'd been some confusion with the RSS feed being accepted to certain platforms. So I had it on 2 separate feeds going to different places. And I have to get up really early in the morning of the episode coming out, upload it myself while I was like, get them uploading while I was off having a shower and stuff. I'd pre-write the show notes and copy and paste them in and then manually upload it to YouTube as well. Like it took me a good hour plus to get an episode out each time. And this was with a hosting site I was paying to use. Okay, I was only paying like, $5 a month for it. But so then I had to make the decision to move to a better platform. And
simply for saving time.
And I got better analytics, etc. But I then had to go through the whole fuss of changing a hosting site, which meant changing my RSS feed, which meant resubmitting to all these platforms again, and just getting, at the time, I don't know, maybe 30 plus episodes, I had to then migrate to another hosting site, and it was just days.
Now, also, I mean, when you started podcasting, to be honest, the landscape of podcasting's changed.
Oh, massively.
People, it was a much rarer thing to do, especially in the UK. It was a much rarer thing to do.
I was still explaining to people what it was, and this is we've been doing it almost 3 years. So I was still explaining to people 3 years ago what a podcast was.
Absolutely.
Don't need to anymore.
No, exactly. People actually know what it is. There's TV shows with known actors in it. It's like talking about podcasting. So what's great is some of the bigger hosting sites now, they're super easy.
Yeah.
They really make it easy. There's none of this hour to release an episode like Greg's talking about. You can do it. You can schedule it. That episode comes out whenever you say it wants to come out. You can also link it up with all of your social media platforms. So as that episode is released, it also sends out a tweet and does a Facebook post and posts to YouTube, and all at the same time, just from, essentially one click, which makes life an awful lot easier, because the last thing you want to be doing is, like Greg was, is getting up
bloody early before work.
Exactly, and the anxiety of trying to get through an hour of admin essentially before you leave for work. No one needs that.
And sometimes it would fail uploading as well, which is even more of a nightmare.
So that's the other thing as well, is the platforms you don't pay for aren't necessarily as stable as others.
Yeah.
And as Greg's saying, if a podcast hosting platform was to disappear, or if it wasn't to work, then you are going to have to move all of your episodes onto a new site, and that is going to be an awful lot of work. It also means, more importantly, is that you're going to have to get that RSS feed and get your subscribers to subscribe to something else. Which means you can literally lose all your, not all, but you could potentially lose all of your listeners, all of those subscribers. You could spend a year trying to get all of those people together, and then, just because of essentially an admin back end issue, lose everyone. Yeah. And that's the last thing you want to do after putting such hard work in.
Yeah, and we did it first because we had to change platforms. So you need to know beforehand, do your own research, have a look at the ones at the best hosting platforms, read reviews. Maybe if you know someone else using them, talk to them. So last year, 2017, in no particular order, these were the most popular hosting sites you could use. Now, if you no statistics, just a list.
Okay,
but if you look at our blog, which is out alongside this podcast, called How to Start a Podcast, Hosting Site, RSS Feed, and Social Media. It's a catchy title, I know.
Hell of a title.
There are links to these sites within the blog. Now, Buzzsprout was in the list.
Okay.
I'm not too aware of Buzzsprout. I see it around. I never looked into it myself. Maybe it's one that's popped up since, but I see it popping up a lot. Blueberry, that one I see get mentioned quite a lot. But again, I've not really dealt with it myself. Libsyn, which is the oldest one. I'm right in thinking this was one of the original podcast hosting sites.
And listen, we have no affiliation with Libsyn.
No.
I love them.
Yes, I do.
I love them with all of my heart.
That's who I moved to. Spoilers.
And to be honest, when people come to us wanting to start a launch podcast for the first time, one of the things we suggest to them is go and look at Libsyn. It's not the cheapest.
No.
It's absolutely not the cheapest. However, it is one of the biggest, so that it's not going to the company isn't going to fold and disappear and you're going to lose everything. It also has some great functionality that not all of them have, not all of the hosting sites have, and also the analytics are killer. The analytics are very good.
I was put off by Libsyn when I first went to it because for me it looked too complicated. Just this is 3 years ago.
Really?
3 years ago, me going to it, I was like, it looks too complicated, bit more expensive. I'm going to go with this other one. That was my first mistake I made in podcasting. Because it's actually really easy. The other two on this list is Blog Talk Radio.
Okay, yep, heard of them.
And Fireside. Fireside I'd heard of quite a lot. Yeah, I hadn't heard of Blog Talk Radio as much. But as me and Jay said, we have no affiliation. We can't tell you which one to use. We can just tell you that personally, as a business and personally, we use Libsyn.
Yeah, and we tend to put, we have no affiliation.
Right.
Like, we really don't have any affiliation with them at all. But I can say that of all of the many, many, many podcasts that we release a week, all of our clients are very happy with Libsyn.
Yeah.
I've only had people complain about hosting sites when it's been other sites. I'm not going to mention which ones, but you know, the 4 or 5 that Greg just mentioned there, they're all solid sites. They're all the big players. And have a look. You know, you want to find one that's a big player in the market, that gets great reviews, that's easy to use and has good analytics. And in my opinion, you really, really want one which integrates with all of your social media channels as well.
That's a big thing.
Just to make life easier. Otherwise, that hour of admin that Greg used to have to do just to post his episode, you know, is still there, because after you've posted it, you know, no one knows it's there unless you're going to start promoting it. So you ain't going to end up having to go to all your social media channels and start posting a tweet or a post, or just to say that the actual episode's out. So I personally would always suggest using Libsyn, but any one of those big players is a good move.
And so that list was 2017. Now in 2018, there are new ones out, and there are ones that have got bigger. So Podbean, I see, is quite a popular one now. Podbean was one that I used to see as quite a low down one, you know, 3 years ago, but now I see it all the time on Twitter and being mentioned. And
Spreaker as well.
Yes, Spreaker.
Back when we were at the National Podcast Awards in 2015 or 2016.
It's crazy when you throw dates around for podcasting. And even though it's been around for, like, you know, some people are celebrating 10 years of podcasting now, but it's just like, God, you forget. I mean, even 2015, you're like, God, 3 years ago, podcasting was already having awards.
That's exactly right, yeah. And I remember when we were at the awards, Spreaker were one of the sponsors.
Right.
And they were like, you know, come use us. And they were, you know, real nice people. And they really knew what they were talking about as well, you know, good guys. And it's nice to see them sort of do well. And, you know, there's a lot to be said to finding you know, any hosting site that you're happy with, essentially, is the one.
You've got your hosting site, you've gone away, done your research, you found your hosting site, you know how much you're spending, you're signed up. That's another box ticked. Now, I always say it's very important to get your social media channel set up before you launch an episode. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and obviously free. YouTube is a good one too, even if you just upload audio, but it is good to maybe further down the line open that up to more opportunities.
Now, something like Libsyn, sorry to keep harping on about it.
Ouch, my foot name dropping.
But Libsyn can actually post directly to YouTube and throw up an image as well.
Yeah.
So that kind of saves a little bit of time for you. But
Hell of a lot of time.
With YouTube, it is better if you do have some specific video to go along with the podcast.
So once it gives you the option to down the line post your own videos, potentially if you're doing the podcast. But when you have your social media site set up, it's just an excellent way to start building a bit of a buzz before your podcast. You can interact with other podcasts. That's one thing I'll say. Don't be afraid of other podcasts. No. They're not your enemy.
They're not competitors.
It's such a welcoming community. It really, really is. I've made so many great friends through podcasting. Some I've not even met, but talk to on a daily basis. I'm in WhatsApp groups of podcasters up and down the country that I've never met, but I talk to them pretty much every day, laughing and joking, and they're just people doing the same as me, and we help each other out and we appear on each other's shows. If you can just tap into that and get ahead of yourself before an episode goes out, talk to these people, tell them you've got an episode coming out. They're not gonna not support you. They will probably mention it on their show. It's really important to get a social media buzz before the episode comes out, no matter how small.
And also, you can learn from these people.
100%.
Like, podcasters are, it's one of the real joys of running a podcast production company is the fact that we get to work with podcasters all the time. And the funny thing is you can really tell a podcaster, even if they haven't launched a podcast. Yeah. Right? You can tell someone who is going to be a podcaster because they're a certain type of person. Like, they're chatty, they're nice. It's very rare. You'd think it's full of a load of people who just want to hear the sound of their own voice, but actually it's a community of people who really, really dig the medium. Yeah. And they love listening to it. And, you can have lengthy arguments about which hosting site to use, and what's better, with every podcaster. But also it's a great way of launching your podcast if by, appearing on other podcasts.
100%.
By doing that, you're actually getting yourself out there and giving yourself a chance to, essentially tap into other audiences. We always talk about this. It's the same thing on social media. If you get the ability to tap into another audience, then do it. Get yourself out there. If you can get 1% of every audience you tap into, you're going to increase your ultimate community.
Yeah, that's it. 100%. Just get your name, First step to being noticed is being mentioned. Get yourself mentioned. Get your name out there first. Get on your social media. Get your Instagram set up. Start following other podcasters. Follow some of their followers. Start responding, asking questions, really engaging with them. And people will know your name before the episode drops. When the episode drops, you're instantly going to have at least a small audience already that's waiting to hear your podcast just out of curiosity. And that'll make a big difference.
And podcasting can be quite a daunting thing. Like, we're on episode 3, 2, 3,
4 maybe,
4, and we haven't even talked about equipment or things. we haven't spoken about any of the actual doing yet. We're just talking about the back end side of things, right? And I understand it can be a real daunting process. So be part of those communities, because it doesn't take long to become an expert.
No.
Like, it doesn't take long to understand what we're talking about here with regards to hosting and stuff and things and what's it, right? And the best way to do that is be part of those communities, and you really will, learn to branch out, and your knowledge will increase tenfold.
100%. Okay, so I'll say that brings us up to that. Brings us up to the end of this episode. You guys know what you need to do. Next time, we get to a bit more of a fun part. We'll actually start talking about recording your podcast, and that's where the fun really happens. See you then. Thank you for listening to GLCast, the official podcast of GLProUK. Be sure to follow us at GLProUK on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and find us on Facebook. Thank you.